So I was asked the other day a question on one of my YouTube videos about whether or not in security profession in Alberta we can whether we can carry weapons. And the answer to that is that we can carry batons in certain situations if your employer has agreed to it, and um, if you've got a certification for having had baton training and you have that certification added to your security license, yeah, you can carry batons. Um, you can carry a flashlight. I carry a flashlight. You can carry handcuffs. But you cannot carry a firearm. And so the question came back, well, what's the point if you can't carry a firearm? What's the point of security? So I thought I would like to respond to this question, and at the same time, give a little update on what I've been doing, because let's see, the end of the week here, I'm going to receive my second paycheck from the new company I'm working with. And so basically, I've now worked there a month. And even having worked security just a month, I've had quite a few different experiences, and I want to share some of those and talk about what I'm doing and just talk about what goes on with security and why there is a need for security regardless of whether or not you're armed. It does, of course, I agree, put someone in a precarious situation sometimes, not to be armed, but to be doing security work. I guess the best thing to keep in mind is that security are not police. I've had a lot of security colleagues now basically say that we're the same as police. We just don't have the firearms. That's not exactly true. All right, security personnel should be keeping their safety in mind and trying to stay out of situations where their safety is put at risk. A police officer has to put himself into a position where he might be at risk, and that's why he might have to use a firearm in the line of duty. But security personnel, if there's something going on that even if it's a crime going on, you don't have to step into the line of danger. You can do your job at a distance. Security is really surveillance, data collection, surveillance, observation, reporting. And there are security jobs where, you're asked to confront people who are involved in some criminal activities, but you always have the leeway to pick and choose whether or not you want to get actively involved in certain situations, right? You can always, in fact, you're going to end up calling the police anyway if the crime is of any substance. So you can always wait for the police to get there before you actually jump in the mix, or you don't even have to jump in the mix at all, right? So basically the demand for security is to have some eyes on the spot all the time, because the police can't be there all the time, and there is a huge high demand for security, even in a city as small as 100,000 people, like Lethbridge, where I live. Some of the different situations where you need security. This photo was taken just yesterday. We got a new contract where there's a dentist's office in the downtown area of Lethbridge, and they own a little strip mall that's kind of like half the block. And there's a lot of there's also 2 liquor stores on that block, and a nightclub, and so there's a lot of interesting activity around the dental office, and they would like security detail, both so that the people who work at the dentist's office and the people who visit for dental services feel more protected, and they just want somebody there to deal with the people. A lot of times they'll get people who are, high on whatever drug, sitting around on their steps, and they need somebody there to kind of compel those people to move on, okay? To not loiter, not panhandle in front of their shop, and these kind of things. So the police, of course, can't be there all the time, right? But a security guard can. And even in that situation, if there's something going on that feels like it's dangerous, say there's 3 guys who are, intoxicated and being loud and obnoxious, security guard from a distance can talk to them. If they start acting at all aggressive, the security guard can, phone the police and have the police come in and deal with them. But at least somebody's on the spot to make people feel a little more safe in these situations, right? Unfortunately for the security guard, there's a lot of disrespect by the public and by the police too, I've noticed. There's the what would you call it? Kind of stereotypes around mall cops and these kind of things. So to some, the security professions are considered like a joke, But it's a hugely in high demand service. In fact, it's so hugely in high demand in Lethbridge that there's not enough people with security licenses to fill the jobs that there are available for security. And so you end up having people risking being fined $5,000 for taking security work, even though they don't have a license. And the companies who are having them work without licenses are risking $25,000 fines by the province for putting people into those positions. But I think most of the companies here are doing it because it's just such a demand to fill, and you can't find enough security guys with licenses to fill it. So they're willing to take the risks because of the high demand. So huge demand for security. So yeah, this is one of the things I've been doing is patrolling, especially during the late afternoon hours in the downtown area of Lethbridge at that certain block. I've also, as I noted in previous videos, I am working at some events. So doing sporting events, doing concerts, and at those events I have different details too. This one I was at a run. There was a what they call the Moonlight Run in Lethbridge. It's a 10K run at night, but in the evening it starts downtown again, and you have a lot of different characters showing up there in different states, and so you have to have somebody around to deal directly with those people and to interface with the cops immediately when it needs to happen. So there's that. I've worked at several concerts now where I've worked the barricade in front of the stage. Um, I did that for the band Disturbed. I did that for what were they called? Mariana's Trench recently. Just last week I was working at ZZ Top, and when I was working at the ZZ Top concert, I was checking people at the door and just checking bags and making sure, people aren't bringing in anything dangerous, right, into the concert, or violating the rights of the band by bringing in like professional recording equipment, those kind of things, right? So all of those, like that detail, really doesn't involve a need to have any weaponry, firearms or anything. I mean, there you can imagine might be certain situations where, um, say somebody was going to come into an event, um, to do a public shooting, like if you were in the U.S. Well, of course that's a different situation, and one that you might want a firearm in, but so might anybody in the public, right? The security is no different than anybody else on the scene in that case. But yeah, for the most part, there's no need for any weaponry, but there is a need for security there. Another day, I worked out at an auction, a big auction, mostly for farming equipment and this and that. They had this huge lot, and they just wanted to make sure things didn't get chaotic with the parking in that lot. So all I had to do really was direct traffic and create a good parking strategy for the many people who were coming and going from the auction. And so there's these kind of work too, which really the parking thing, of course, really isn't so much security, but I suppose it's good to have somebody out there in the lot when you have thousands of people, just to make sure there's nobody breaking into cars and those kind of things too. But that really wasn't so much the job as was directing traffic. My main detail these days, and the one that I got immediately when I was hired, it was to work nights during the weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, at an apartment complex where there was recently a murder. There was a murder that occurred in February, and it's one of only 2 murders that occurred in Lethbridge in the past year, and that number is like blows away the records for the city. So there are some low-income apartment complexes in the city where there's significant drug trafficking and issues almost every night, right? Where there's either medical issues or policing issues. And this is one of those apartment complexes. And when the murder occurred here, basically a woman was beaten to death in her apartment by someone still unknown. This is a memorial outside of the apartment to her. Then the apartment owner, in desperation, looked to get in some security at the apartment because they don't want people turned off from living there because they don't feel safe, right? So in order to protect their business, they needed to pay for security. But security is, costly to somebody that has an apartment complex. You're paying somebody to be there. In this case, 6 hours a night on weekends, and it adds up. If the apartment complex is low income to begin with, you're not pulling in a lot of revenue anyway. So, and this is probably why pay for security jobs is generally very low, right? Because people really do want, business owners really do want to hire security for events and for security detail at their businesses, but they can't afford to pay a lot for these services, and so you end up with people working security for very low pay, and then you end up with the whole, the problem around licensing and stuff, because why would somebody want to pursue a license and go through a whole lot of training and the bureaucracy of of keeping a license, of obtaining and keeping a license in the province, if the job is going to be a low income job to begin with, Anyway, these are just some of the internal struggles. But yeah, I've been working the nights at the apartments, and it's been very interesting. There's not a night that goes by where some kind of incident doesn't occur. And I'll just show you a couple of images from around the apartments. This is one of the doors. I haven't figured out what's going on here, but it looked like some weird hoodoo stuff when it was my first impression of it. Is lying around this door of I don't know if it's chalk or salt or what. Haven't wanted to put any in my mouth. It could be Lysol, who knows. I find the doors jammed open a lot, allowing people to come and go that don't belong in the apartments. This one I found one evening jammed open with a crack pipe. There was about a week ago, there was a guy found doing some graffiti underneath one of the stairwells. This was what he had painted under there. He ended up getting arrested. Every night I find hypodermic needles inside the apartment and out. Here's some, who knows what, heroin with ketchup chips. Find the other tools that go along with it, like, I find lots of these rubber bands. I find lots of cotton, like Q-tips and things like this to filter heroin. I find lots of pen inserts, like that, the inside, the ink well part, but not the tube, because people want the straw for different things. So there's a lot of drug stuff going on in there. And the other night, I had my most interesting night this past weekend, where I had seen three guys hanging out by the front door of one of the apartments that didn't seem like they belonged there. And so I approached them, and they went into the apartments as soon as they saw me approaching. And then they went in different directions, right? So a couple of them went up the stairs. One of them went down the stairs, and I followed the one that went down the stairs onto the first level, found him knocking on a door. And I recognized him, actually. He's a guy that I know, a kid that I know. So I started talking to him briefly. And behind the door that he was knocking on, which is a known couple of interesting people living there, I heard an argument break out, and then very quickly a violent scuffle that came up against the door. So the guy I was talking to ran, and I pounded on the door and told them inside that, yelled at him inside that that security was here, and then I'm phoning 911, and then I could hear one of the people trying to break up the fight, and I walked over to the front door as I was talking to 911 dispatch so that I could let the police in through the door. And when I did, I could see down the way, I saw somebody come tumbling out of the balcony of that apartment onto the lawn. So I went to go see the guy. It's another guy that that I've known from the work there over the past few weeks. Who's a strung out kind of drug addicted character. He fell out onto the lawn and he was trying to call for help, but didn't have much breath. It's obviously the guy that got assaulted and beat up. And so I had him sit on the lawn while I was waiting for police. And since I was already on dispatch with 911, I made sure they send an ambulance as well. The guy kind of stripped off his jacket and shirt because he had been not only beaten in the face but in the chest, and turns out he had some broken ribs and punctured lung, and so he felt pretty uncomfortable with the clothes on. Stripped him off, and he was in a panic. The police got there, and I told them what happened and where it happened, and they started dealing with the people in the apartment where it occurred. One of them did, and other ones stayed out with me and talked to me about the situation. He's actually someone who was looking to come train jiu-jitsu at my garage. I guess he had sent me an email through the Gracie system, but I never received it. But he recognized me, and so we talked about what had happened. He's the one I gave the full report to about the incident. But the other one, when he comes out, the other guy, he turns out to be kind of a shitty cop, or very unprofessional anyway. He starts, while we're waiting for the ambulance, he's talking to the assault victim, and he's really making all kinds of poorly tasted jokes at the victim's expense. For instance, the victim tells him, my rib is rubbing against my liver, and the constable was joking in a dark way. Well, how do you know it's your liver? You don't know it's your liver. Maybe it's your kidney. And he's shooting us, conspiratorial looks and a little smirk, wanting us to play into the joke, right? Then when the EMS guys do get there, the EMS guys, do their assessment, and one of them tells us he's got broken ribs and he's losing air out of one of his lungs. And then the constable continues on with this poor taste, unprofessional joking, and at the guy's expense, he tells the EMS guy, he's like, well, he's got broken ribs, hey? Well, how in your professional opinion, what organ would you say is next to those broken ribs? You think it's his liver? And he's just being a dick and treating the guy like an object. And so ultimately, after all was said and done, the guy went to the hospital, and the people who were involved in the assault were arrested. The next day, I started complaining about the unprofessional nature of this police constable's behavior, and some stuff has come of that with the Lethbridge police, where they've had briefings with all of their officers about the relationships, improving relationships with security professionals. They've had briefings with all of them about protecting the human dignity of the public, anybody they encounter, whether they know them previously, and they know that they have lifestyle issues or not. They know that they're criminal or not. They still got to protect their human dignity. And the guy himself is receiving some reprimand from the incident. So yeah, all of that is going on. But if I hadn't been there, I happened to be there on the spot. at that point, there really could have, I believe, been another murder by violent beating, because as soon as this guy started getting assaulted, I was pounding on the door. Like within seconds, I was pounding on the door and letting them know that the police are on their way. So whatever happened in there could have gone on a lot longer, and the guy could have really been either, you know, he could have ended up permanently disabled from the event or dead, you know, if I hadn't been there. And I guess, you know, it puts me a little bit in harm's way, for sure. In fact, I'm thinking about going to buy a vest, just so that I can have a stab-resistant vest, because that's what I'm most worried about being. See, up here we don't have the gun issues that you have in the United States, but up here what happens is people will get beaten and stabbed, right? So I'm thinking about buying a vest, you know, just because it's a good safety precaution item for to have a stab-resistant vest on, when, especially when I'm working in situations like the apartment complex. But I don't really see a need to have a firearm. I should be able to mostly avoid getting myself into situations where I need to be defending myself against someone like that, you know. And it's always my choice, right? I mean, I didn't have to be pounding on that door and be trying to interface directly. I could have very easily just went and called 911 without their knowledge at all, if I was concerned for my welfare in that situation. So it's all about how you play the game, I guess. But yeah, those are some of my recent experiences and some of my feedback on the need for security, and whether there's a need for security to have firearms. I don't think there is, but there are situations, I guess, where it might be nice to feel that you're protected in that way. But for the most part, I think I can get by without it. Anyway, that's that's the update. I'll be curious to see what feedback I get from this.